Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 777, and today is March 31st, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got quite a bit of news to get through on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to head on over to the YouTube channel for the Kyle Anzalone Show and subscribe. I will be doing another episode of that show later today. And for all my work, follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. All right, first story here today is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Trump says he's pissed off at Putin and threatens secondary tariffs. So President Trump said Sunday that he was pissed off at Russian President Vladimir Putin and warned he could hit Russia with secondary tariffs on all oil if a peace deal to end Ukraine war isn't reached. Trump said he was unhappy with Putin questioning Zelensky's legitimacy. On Friday, Putin suggested replacing Zelensky with a transitional administration to prepare for elections in Ukraine. Putin's comments came after Zelensky said he believes that the Russian leader will soon be dead. He will die soon. This is a fact, and everything will be over, Zelensky said in a March 26th interview. Trump has previously criticized Zelensky for not holding elections and even called the Ukrainian leader a dictator, but said in a phone call with NBC News that he was angry over Putin's comments about the Ukrainian leader. Trump said, "If Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think that was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think that it was Russia's fault, I'm going to put secondary tariffs on oil coming from Russia. That would be if you buy oil from Russia, you can't do business in the United States. There will be a 25% tariff on all oil, a 25 to 50% tariff on oil." So it remains unclear if the current negotiations between the U.S. and Russia will lead to a full ceasefire in Ukraine and a lasting peace deal. Both sides have nominally agreed to stop targeting energy infrastructure and halting attacks in the Black Sea. Fighting continues across the front lines. Russian strikes are pounding Ukraine, and Ukraine is still launching drones into Russia. So next up, our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is making a trip around Southeast Asia, and he made a stop in the Philippines where he made some provocative comments. So Hegseth announces U.S. deployment of another missile system in the Philippines. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced on Friday that the U.S. would deploy anti-ship missile systems to the Philippines, a move that's sure to raise tensions with China. The Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Indication System has a range of about 100 miles and would be able to hit Chinese targets in the South China Sea, where the Chinese and Philippines Coast Guards often have tense encounters over disputed routes and reefs. The deployment of the system to the Philippines will be on top of the presence of a U.S. Typhoon missile launcher in the country. The Typhoon is a land-based missile system capable of firing Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of about 1,000 miles, meaning they could hit mainland China. The Typhoon system could also fire SM-6 missiles, which have a range of about 290 miles. U.S. officials envision using the SM-6 to target Chinese ships in a future war over Taiwan. China has been furious over the Typhoon deploying, saying that by sending the missile system to the region, the U.S. is inciting a geopolitical confrontation and an arms race. Hegseth announced that the U.S. was deploying the system along with unmanned surface vehicles or drone boats to the Philippines while in the country. Hegseth said alongside his Philippine counterpart, "We agree that the United States will deploy additional advanced capabilities to the Philippines. This includes using the NMESIS anti-ship system and highly capable unmanned surface vehicles in exercise Balkatan this April. These systems will enable U.S. forces and the armed forces of the Philippines to train together using advanced capabilities to defend the Philippines' sovereignty." So that was a statement from Hegseth. The military exercise, the war games he was referring to there, are annual drills conducted between the U.S. and the Philippines. The Typhoon system was first deployed to the Philippines during those war games, the annual version of those war games last year, and then they just stayed. So during Hegseth's visit, the U.S. and the Philippines reaffirmed that the U.S. Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to the Philippine boats in the South China Sea, a commitment first made during the first Trump administration and repeatedly reaffirmed during the Biden administration. The comment means that the U.S. is willing to go to war with China over the maritime dispute in the South China Sea, despite the risk of nuclear escalation. The U.S. and the Philippines said in a joint statement that Hegseth and the Philippines defense minister reaffirmed that the Mutual Defense Treaty extends to armed attacks against either country's armed forces, aircraft, and public vessels, including those of their coast guards anywhere in the South China Sea. And of course, if there was ever a war between the U.S. and the Philippines, a war between China and the U.S., or a war between China and the Philippines, in one direction, one side's providing a lot more support, where if the U.S. goes to war with China, the Philippines are, maybe an important geostrategical location for the U.S. to have military bases, but it's not as if the Philippine military is going to make massive contributions to that fight. Next up here, one from our friend Will Porter at antiwar.com on March 28th, Senator Sanders to force vote to block arms sales to Israel. So Senator Bernie Sanders has vowed to force votes on two separate measures that would bar $8.8 billion in proposed weapons sales to Israel, demanding that Washington end its complicity in the carnage in the Gaza Strip. In a statement on Thursday, Senator Sanders said he would compel votes on a pair of joint resolutions of disapproval next week to block the arms deals, which include more than 35,000 2,000-pound bombs. He said these sales would provide $8.8 billion in bombs and other munitions to the Prime Minister Netanyahu's extremist government to continue its destruction of Gaza. Netanyahu has clearly violated U.S. and international law in this brutal war. He added that the U.S. has been carried out almost entirely with the war has been carried out almost entirely with American weapons and some $18 billion in U.S. taxpayer dollars. The administration has approved a flurry of arms sales to Israel in recent weeks, including 3,000 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles for $660 million and two massive arms deals for other munitions and guidance kits worth $6.75 billion and $2.04 billion respectively. The senator went on to cite the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza, noting that no aid has entered the enclave for nearly 1 month, thanks to a complete blockade by the Israeli military. He explained that's no food, water, medicine, or fuel since the start of March. Blocking humanitarian aid is morally abhorrent and a clear violation of both the Geneva Convention and the Foreign Assistance Act. More than 50,000 Palestinians have been killed since Israel launched its military operations in Gaza in October 2023, including 17,000 children. According to local health officials, another 113,000 have been wounded. Sanders' effort is likely to face major opposition in the upper chamber, which overwhelmingly voted down a similar resolution last November. Even with Democrats in the majority, no Republicans supported the earlier move, while just 19 Democrats backed at least one of these measures. According to the AP, no foreign arms deal has ever been successfully blocked through a joint resolution, though Congress can attempt to bar weapons sales through resolutions of disapproval under the Arms Export Control Act. None have survived the presidential veto, and I think the only one to be vetoed was the Yemen one by Trump. All right, next up, this is one I wrote for antiwar.com on March 28th. Israeli Mossad seeking countries to take large number of Palestinians. As Tel Aviv works to implement President Donald Trump's plan to cleanse Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, the Israeli Mossad is approaching other countries to take in large number of Gazans. Trump has said that he wants to send Palestinians to refugee cities in another country. Axios reporter Barak Raviv spoke with sources who said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered his intelligence agency to find a country to take the Palestinians weeks ago. Throughout March, multiple reports have documented U.S. or Israeli officials contacting a number of countries about taking Palestinians, including Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, Syria, and Indonesia. Reviewed sources said that South Sudan has also been approached. When asked by the media about the reports, the government said they rejected the proposal or denied it was made. Finding countries to take more than 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza is a key component of Trump and Tel Aviv's plan to cleanse the Strip. Trump has said that he wants to clean out and take over Gaza in order to create the Riviera of the Middle East. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said Trump's plan is taking shape. He proposed expelling between 5,000 and 10,000 Palestinians from Gaza each day, and Tel Aviv has since created a government agency dedicated to removing the Palestinians from Gaza. While Israeli officials and Trump have described the removal of Palestinians from Gaza as voluntary, Tel Aviv is making life in the Strip unbearable, and Washington is supplying the weapons for the operation. Israel has cut off all of its aid, food, fuel, and medicine from entering Gaza. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Tel Aviv broke its ceasefire with Hamas and resumed bombing the Strip. Over 800 Palestinians have been killed since the onslaught resumed, pushing the death toll for Gaza since October 7th, 2023 to over 50,000. Tel Aviv is planning widespread invasion of Gaza that will push the people into a small zone dubbed a humanitarian area. Washington and Tel Aviv present the resettlement of Palestinians as an act of charity. However, it is a war crime and genocide. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp, March 30th, antiwar.com. Netanyahu increasing pressure on Hamas after it accepted Israel's ceasefire proposal. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Sunday that Israel will increase the pressure on Hamas following the Palestinian group's acceptance of an Egyptian proposal for a renewed Gaza ceasefire, which Israel rejected with a counteroffer. So this is a statement from Netanyahu. Last night, the Security Cabinet convened and decided to increase the pressure, which is already increased, in order to further pound Hamas and create optimal conditions for releasing our hostages. Netanyahu then addressed what he called lies about his Gaza strategy. He said, one, that we are not holding negotiations. This is incorrect. We are holding them under fire. Therefore, they are also effective. Suddenly, we see that there are cracks. Netanyahu also addressed claims that he hasn't thought about the final stage. The Israeli Prime Minister said his long-term plan for Gaza involves Hamas disarming, its leaders being expelled, Israel taking control of the general security of Gaza, which could mean full military occupation, and the implementation of Trump's ethnic cleansing plan, which he calls voluntary migration. Netanyahu said, Hamas will lay down its weapons. Its leaders will be allowed to leave. We will see general security in Gaza and allow the realization of Trump's plan for voluntary migration. This is the plan. We are not hiding this, and we are ready to discuss it at any time. And again, they're being open that they want this genocide. So according to CNN, the Egyptian proposal accepted by Hamas would involve the release of 5 Israeli hostages, including dual U.S.-Israeli citizen Indian Alexander, in exchange for a renewed ceasefire and lifting of the Israeli blockade on aid entering Gaza. Other reports say ceasefire under the proposal would last 50 days. The ceasefire would also involve negotiations on implementing the second phase of the initial deal reached in January, which would involve the full Israeli withdrawal and permanent truce. Netanyahu's comments made clear that he is not interested in a deal that would lead to a permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal. So next, on to just what's happening in Gaza kind of day by day. On Sunday, Israeli strikes on Gaza killed 64 people, medical sources told Al Jazeera, as Palestinians accepted to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. On early Sunday, when the death toll was at 35, Hind Karaji, a reporter from Al Jazeera, said 10 children were among those killed. She also reported shortages at the Al-Aqsa hospital due to the Israeli blockade on all goods entering Gaza, which was imposed on March 2nd. We are talking about more than 3 weeks of zero aid trucks entering the Gaza Strip. The Israeli authorities continue to prevent any aid or medicine to come in. So the Israeli blockade is also causing severe food shortages in Gaza, leaving families struggling to find meals for Eid. Tom Fletcher, the UN's humanitarian chief, said Friday that food shipments are being blocked by Israel and are rotting at the Gaza border. He explained all entry into Gaza are now closed. At the border, food is rotting, medicine is expiring, vital medical equipment is stuck. It's a basic principle of humanitarian law still count. The international community must act upon them. Also on Sunday, the bodies of 14 Palestinian rescue workers who were executed by Israeli forces were recovered and brought to the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. According to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, 8 of the dead were members of their own staff, were their medics, and 5 worked for the Gaza Civil Defense and 1 worked for the UN aid agency. The rescue workers went missing last week near the southern city of Rafah, and on Saturday, the Israeli military acknowledged it attacked the medics, claiming it targeted what it thought were Hamas vehicles, but turned out to be rescue vehicles. The IDF said, after initial inquiry, it was determined that some suspicious vehicles were ambulances and fire trucks. So Gaza's health ministry said in a statement condemning the Israeli execution of the rescue workers as a heinous crime, which it certainly is. And I mean, anybody could just imagine what would happen if somebody dropped a bomb on a fire truck in an ambulance in your town as they were rushing to save some old lady. The response would be, absolutely massive. All right, moving on here to Iran. Trump threatens Iran with bombing if nuclear deal is not reached. President Trump on Sunday threatened to bomb Iran if a deal wasn't reached on the country's civilian nuclear program. So, if they don't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before, Trump told NBC News in a phone interview. The president has made similar threats towards Iran, but Sunday's marked the most explicit yet, and it comes as the U.S. is sending more bombers to the region and pounding Yemen with daily airstrikes. Trump also said he could hit Iran with secondary tariffs if a deal isn't reached. And I think this is true of both the Russia story we were talking about earlier and this one, that Trump either doesn't understand or is just misspeaking here, and he means secondary sanctions, not secondary tariffs. So Trump's threat comes after U.S. intelligence agencies said their annual threat assessment that there's no evidence that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon or that the Iranian supreme leader has reversed his 2003 fatwa that banned the production of weapons of mass destruction. Iran recently responded to Trump's letter addressed to the Ayatollah proposing nuclear talks and giving Tehran a 2-month deadline to reach a deal. A U.S. official told Axios that the deployment of B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia was not disconnected from this deadline. Iranian officials have repeatedly rejected the idea of direct talks with the United States in the face of Trump's so-called maximum pressure campaign, but have left the door open for indirect negotiation. The Iranian president said Sunday that Iran's response to Trump's letter made indirect talks possible, but that the U.S. behavior would determine how things moved forward. He explained, while Iran's response rules out the possibility of direct talks between the two sides, it states that for the path for indirect negotiation remains open. Iranian officials have been noting the fact that Trump was the one who tore up the 2015 nuclear deal by reimposing sanctions on Iran. As we have stated before, this is a statement from the president, Iran has never closed channels of indirect communication. In its response, Iran reaffirmed that it never shield away from any engagement in negotiations, but rather it has just been the United States' repeated violations of agreements and commitments that have created problems on this path. So his statement continues, "It is the behavior of the Americans that will determine whether negotiations will move forward." So this, while it doesn't look promising, I still do not believe that Israel wants war with Iran. Therefore, I don't think the U.S. will go to war with Iran. Although Trump does risk kind of walking himself into a corner with his, very threatening rhetoric on this issue. Next up here, this one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. It is Israeli troops fire on French UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. So Israeli troops have fired on the UNIFIL peacekeeping patrol in southern Lebanon near Ramelsh on Saturday. The patrol was already scheduled, so Israel informed UNIFIL peacekeepers would be in the area around that time, suggesting this was not a case of mistaken identity. A separate incident of Israeli troops confronting UNIFIL peacekeepers inside Lebanon was also reported, with Israelis pointing laser sights at UNIFIL personnel but not actually opening fire. No injuries were reported in the incidents, but the remains they're terming the gunfire as warning shots. And, it's interesting that this comes as France is, telling Israel they should respect the ceasefire in Lebanon, which they are not doing. And France, along with the U.S., was a guarantor of that ceasefire. And so, from the French position, they're supposed to hold Israel accountable and make sure they don't violate that ceasefire. And even though Israel has been violating that ceasefire through the entire ceasefire, these violations have gotten far more significant in recent days and has led France to issue a response telling the Israelis to knock it off. And I wonder if the Israeli response to that is firing on some French UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. All right, next up here, again from Jason Ditz, Syrian Kurds fault new inclusive government after getting shut out of the cabinet. So Syria's Islamist Tahrir al-Sham promised to deliver a diverse, inclusive government for the nation. While some media reports are praising the new government unveiled today as mission accomplished, there are many unsatisfied at what passes for representation. Syrian Kurdish groups in particular are speaking out about this government simply offering more of a name dominated by a single party and faction, despite the Kurdish SDF making a deal with HTS recently. And so, they gave them some token administrations, but nothing real. Moving on to Yemen, U.S. launches dozens more airstrikes on Yemen, killing at least one civilian. The U.S. has launched a dozen more airstrikes on Yemen on Sunday as the Houthis claim more attacks on U.S. warships and fired another missile at Israel. Yemen's health ministry said U.S. airstrikes on the Yemeni capital of Sana'a killed one civilian and wounded 4 others. At least 13 U.S. airstrikes were reported in the Sana'a province on Sunday night. U.S. airstrikes pounded other areas of Yemen on Sunday, including the northern Sana'a province. According to reports from Yemen's Saba news agency, Sana'a was hit with at least 11 U.S. airstrikes in the morning. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have shown no signs they're backing down in the face of the U.S. bombing campaign, which began on March 15th. Houthi military spokesman reaffirmed Sunday that Yemeni military operations will continue until the aggression against Gaza stops and that the siege is lifted. And so Trump has basically just got himself into the same situation that Biden had gotten the U.S. in Yemen. So this is important. Gabbard calls Trump a president of peace, despite Yemen bombing campaign and the support for the slaughter in Gaza. So on Saturday, National Intelligence and Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, called President Trump the president of peace, despite his bombing campaign in Yemen and his support for the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So this was an X post. She said, President Trump is The president of peace, he is ending bloodshed across the world and will deliver on lasting peace in the Middle East. Where Joe Biden failed, President Trump will succeed. And it's just disappointing that this was somebody we were hoping to be a little bit better. Turns out to be just another political hack. All right, last up here, U.S. launches another airstrike in Somalia, says multiple ISIS operatives were killed. So U.S. AFRICOM Command said in a press release on Sunday that its forces launched an airstrike in Somalia a day earlier against multiple ISIS targets in the northern Puntland region. AFRICOM reaffirmed its initial assessment, found that multiple ISIS operatives were killed and no civilians were harmed, although the Pentagon, as we always say, is notorious for hiding and undercounting civilian casualties in Somalia. The command said the strike was launched in coordination with the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based federal government, but Puntland is not under control of the federal government. Last year, Puntland, which was acted as a semi-autonomous state, announced it was withdrawing from the federal system. Local Puntland forces have been fighting against ISIS forces on the ground and have been receiving air support from the United States. The latest U.S. airstrike marked the fourth known time that the U.S. bombed Somalia this month. Airstrikes in the first half of the month targeted al-Shabaab, which is conducting an offensive against the federal government in central Somalia, and launched an airstrike on March 25th, also targeting ISIS in Puntland. And I think one of the risks here is that this could be connected to Gaza, in that the U.S. is trying to show these maybe independent regions or the federal government of Somalia that, look, if you want recognition, control of different territory, then you could take in the Palestinians in exchange. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Also, a very special thank you to the few listeners who I met yesterday when I was speaking at the Massachusetts State Libertarian Party Convention. Absolutely an excellent convention. It did seem that the war issue was on the top of everybody's agenda, which I absolutely loved. The other speakers were amazing, and overall was just a really good and fun experience. I did record my speech, and so assuming that I could get the audio just a little bit better, I think I'm going to put it out as an episode on the Kyle Anzalone show. So be sure you subscribe to that channel so you can check out that speech. And thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode soon.